Now, Hugo Black, some of you may know, would go on to reach the greatest heights that lawyers probably can reach in our profession. He would eventually be nominated to the United States Supreme Court, and he would serve as a associate justice of the court for decades before his death. Before that, he was elected to the United States Senate from the state of Alabama. But at the time that he agreed to represent Reverend Edwin Stevenson, he was still a young man, a young lawyer in Birmingham making a name for himself. And this case would do a lot for his reputation in that state that would help him later on as he sought a seat on the U.S. Senate and later on an appointment to the United States Supreme Court. So he agreed to represent Edwin Stevenson, and I don't have. I want to leave some time for questions that you guys might have about it, but I do want to read you one part of the trial that made it very clear that the defense decided, as a strategic matter, to put Catholicism itself on trial. Rather as a part of its defense strategy. So let me read you a little bit from the testimony that was given by Mary Stevenson, the wife of Reverend Edwin Stevenson, mother of Ruth Stevenson, who was called during the defense case to help the effort to acquit her husband. When Hugo Black called Mary Stevenson to the stand later that day, little question could have remained that the lawyer intended to put the Catholic Church itself on trial. He moved quickly through the preliminaries. Was she the defendant's wife? How long had they been married? How many children did they have? How old was Ruth at the time of this trouble? And reached the crux of the case in a matter of seconds. What church do you belong to, Mrs. Stevenson? Methodist. Have you ever belonged to the Catholic? No, sir. So far as you know, have any of your people ever belonged to the Catholic? No, sir. Black asked if she and her husband Edwin had been having trouble with their daughter Ruth over the question of religion. They had, Mary Stevenson said, and she told the jury about having to enlist the help of Police Chief Shirley to get the girl back from the Catholic Fred Bender's house one day when she ran off there. And she told the jury about taking Ruth away to Texas to visit some of her family, and how Ruth had escaped from the train at Texarkana on their way back home. Where did you find her? Hugo Black asked. Found her in a Catholic hospital, came Mary Stevenson's terse reply. Black turned to the day of the shooting and asked how she and Edwin had come to know that their daughter was missing again. A friend had called their home from the department store where Ruth was working at the time and told them that Ruth had not returned after lunch. So Edwin went to the store to get more information, and Mary had called Police Chief T.J. Shirley for help, she said. Had they known Ruth had run off to get married? No, sir, they had not. They hadn't any idea that Ruth and Pedro were even involved with each other. They knew the paper hanger, but no, he had never come to visit Ruth at the house. Hugo Black dwelled a while longer on the fact that Ruth Stevenson had kept her parents in the dark about her relationship with Guzman. Many of the jurors were family men with children still at home, the kind of men unlikely to bless a child's silent acts of defiance. Did you let him come there? No, sir. She hadn't any idea that Guzman had been showing Ruth any attention at all. He had only come to the house to hang some wallpaper. Without directly asking, Black pointed out a reason Edwin and Mary Stevenson would have had to resist Ruth's relationship with Pedro had the girl been less secretive. Did you know whether he was Greek or Puerto Rican or Dago? Asked the lawyer, or what he was? The popular slur passed through his lips without a whiff of conscience. I looked at him as a servant, Mary Stevenson said dismissively, half Greek. Hugo Black left the answer half Greek hang in the air. though a natural next question might reasonably have been, "What got you about the other half, Mrs. Stevenson?" Black had a plan to come back to that later, at a moment when its impact could be used to maximum effect. Could he talk English? Not that I could hardly understand, she said. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the kind of direct examination that was used during the trial of, in the defense of Reverend Edwin Stevenson. And it gives you an idea of if something like that was being engaged in by a trial attorney, how accepting the community was at that time of that kind of strategy. These were words from a lawyer that he didn't even hesitate to say at the time, which gives us a really a good idea of what was common and not even worthy of hesitation on the part of an attorney like Hugo Black. So that was a little bit of the trial strategy. Now, I hope some of you actually might want to read this book yourself, and so I won't tell you what happened at this trial. I'll let you, if you do decide to read it for yourselves, discover that yourselves. There's many, many moments of this trial, which is the focus of the book, the last part of the book, that are really amazingly revealing about who we were, what we were afraid of, what our most important commitments were at that time, to allow this defense strategy to take the tone that it did. I also, before I stop for any questions that you guys might have about the research that went into this or the way that I wrote it, I just want to talk a little bit about the style of it, because as you can see from the excerpts that I read, I hope, that I decided to write this in the narrative, and that was intentionally to make it accessible to that broader audience that I thought might be interested in this historic, true story that somehow we forgot about, which is a little bit remarkable given the fact that a future Supreme Court justice would be the lead attorney for Reverend Edwin Stevenson, and the fact that it was covered by newspapers across the country at this time. But it as our history does so often, it quickly fell away from us and our memory banks, and the only place that I found it even talked about when I began my research for the book was in biographies of Hugo Black, mentioned mostly in passing, and certainly no book written about the event itself. And so that gave me the incentive to write it myself. I'll stop there and take whatever questions that you guys might have about it.
Yeah. Can I clarify now? Reverend Stevenson was black.
Reverend Edwin Stevenson was white.
He was white. Was the Catholic minister?
James Coyle was white. James Coyle was actually a native of Ireland. He was born and raised in Ireland. He finished his education in Rome. He was ordained in Rome. And he was sent over to Alabama to begin his priesthood when he was just barely in his 20s. The state was in great need of priests at that time, Catholic priests, because there were a number of jobs that were attracting large numbers of Catholics into the state at that time. And so he began his priesthood in Mobile, and then was sent to Birmingham when he was a little bit older to be the lead priest for St. Paul's Catholic Church, which is a cathedral now, a beautiful church, actually depicted on the front of this the book itself. St. Paul's is on the same block that the courthouse was. That is pictured here. where the trial of Reverend Edwin Stevenson would take place. And in between those two massive buildings on 3rd Avenue in Birmingham was the rectory, the home where James Coyle lived and where the shooting occurred. So all of this took place right on this block in Birmingham.
Is this building still there?
The cathedral is still there. It is gorgeous. So if you ever get down to Birmingham, I encourage you to go and to go inside it. The courthouse, sadly, like so many historic buildings, was torn down and replaced by a new building, courthouse in Birmingham, which is really a shame because it was quite a architectural feat itself.
What did your research entail interviewing about the people?
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. What did your research entail, and were you able to interview any of the people?
Well, my research led me to Birmingham, Alabama, and other places in Alabama more times than I ever imagined I would be there in my life. This kind of research was different for law professors. Usually, we're able to find most of what we need electronically these days, or from old law books that are generally kept in a fine law library like the ones that we have here. But because this is an old historical story, the information about it was really located in archives, archival libraries in Alabama. But lucky for me, this event actually happened when it did in 1921, which was a period before commercial radio, before television. And so this is a time when a city the size of Birmingham, Alabama it wouldn't be unusual to have 3 large newspapers operating at the same time. That was the case in Birmingham, one issuing morning issues of the newspaper, 2 afternoon editions. And so because this was the huge story that it was, every day those newspapers were writing articles or publishing articles about this event, the parties involved. And so that was a great help to me in getting details, the kind of details that are really necessary to write the book in the narrative, to bring it back to life with the kind of detail that is required to do that. So I was lucky, actually. It also, there's downsides because it meant that everybody who was directly involved in this story was no longer alive. I did do some interviews of some wonderful ladies who were at that time in their late 80s, 90s. One gentleman who was over 100 years old, who were young Catholic children at the time, living in Birmingham, Alabama, who explained to me, described to me what it was like to be Catholic at a time when the Catholics were being targeted so openly by members of the Klan and other members of this community at that time. And that was helpful to me just for the background, for my understanding of the social context in which this event occurred. So I did interview them, and I was lucky to find a grandson of the prosecutor, Joe Tate's grandson, who spent some time talking to me about him, and that gave me a better idea about who he was and some of the family stories about him. I also interviewed Hugo Black's son, who was by that point in his 80s, living in Miami, Florida, and I took a trip down there to talk to him about his father and whether he remembered anything about his father talking about this particular case. And so that was helpful to me as well. But all of the people who were directly involved in the story were no longer alive to talk about. Ruth Pedro, Joe Tate, the other defense attorneys, Hugo Black, and so on. So So I was, it took, as a result of that, it took a long time to really get all the information that I needed to write it in the way that I did. 3 years to research the book and another 2 years to write it.